Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's important conversation, state pension power and how state policymakers are deploying it to grow a strong economy for retirees, workers, and the public. I'm Renaye Manley, and I serve on the Horizon Project Board, and I'm honored to serve as your moderator today. And I want to extend a special thank you to Americans for Financial Reform and the Horizon Project for convening this critical conversation. State pension funds represent trillions of dollars in long-term capital, and that capital belongs to the very people who make our society run. Teachers, firefighters, healthcare workers, public employees who have dedicated their careers to serving our communities. These funds are not just about securing retirement, although that's the primary function. They're also leveraging economic power that strengthens local economies, ensures responsible investment, and advances economic policies that benefit workers, retirees, and the public. That's why today's panel is so timely and necessary. We are joined by a powerhouse group of leaders who are on the front lines of fighting for responsible, worker-centered, and sustainable investment policies at the state level. I'm so excited to be a part of this conversation, and I'm sure it's going to be a enlightening conversation for all of us. So let me begin with the introductions of our amazing panel today. First of all, we have Natalia Renta. Natalia is the Associate Director of Corporate Governance and Power at Americans for Financial Reform Education Fund, where she fights for a fair and just financial system. She authored a policy roadmap state policymakers and pension officials can follow to protect and expand the pension's ability to make investment decisions that benefit workers and their communities. We also have Arizona State Senator Lauren Kuby. She's a newly elected state senator serving Legislative District 8 and a longtime advocate for environmental, consumer, and worker protections. She's a former two-term city council member and vice mayor, and she has been a leader in advancing climate action, social equity, and corporate accountability. Our other panelists include Randi Weingarten, the president of the 1.8 million member AFT, which represents teachers, paraprofessionals, and school-related personnel, higher education faculty and staff, nurses, and other healthcare professionals, local, state, and federal government employees, and early childhood educators. We also have joining us today Brooke Lierman, who serves as the 34th elected Comptroller of the state of Maryland and the first woman to be independently elected to one of Maryland's state constitutional offices. After running a strong policy-focused and grassroots-led two-year campaign, she was elected with over 60% of the vote in November of 2022. She's an attorney by training, practicing as a civil rights and disability rights lawyer for many years, and prior to her election as comptroller, she served for 8 years as a member of the Maryland House of Delegates, representing part of Baltimore City. And then, last but not least, we have Keith Ellison, who has served as Maryland's Attorney General since January 2019. He was the lead prosecutor in the matter of the May 20th death of George Floyd in Minneapolis and led the team that successfully convicted former police officer Derek Chauvin on a charge of second-degree unintentional murder. As a people's lawyer, Attorney General Ellison's job is to help Minnesotans support their lives and live with dignity, safety, and respect. During the COVID-19 pandemic, his office enforced executive orders barring convictions of price gouging and successfully defended the constitutionality of pandemic-related executive orders in court. I'm going to start now with the questions. I'm so excited to hear from our panelists today. And we'll just continue on. So my first question is for Senator Kuby. And Senator, my question for you is that you are in a state that has had to respond to attacks on pensions' ability to make investment decisions in the best interest of the beneficiaries. What lines of attack have you seen, and how are you playing defense And how are you integrating both short-term and longer-term strategies to address these attacks on the funds?
Thank you so much. Thank you for, it's such an honor to be on this panel with champions, with people I've long admired. And so thank you for the opportunity. Yes, I serve in the Arizona legislature, which is the most right-wing legislature in the history of our state. And we definitely put the crazy into AZ. And we did see a terrible bill go past the Senate. It's going to be adopted with no doubt in the House. And luckily, we have a governor, Katie Hobbs, who we expect will veto it. But still, it is an attack on the what's called the Arizona Retirement Security Coalition and the Arizona State Retirement System, the ASRS. It's this bill 1093. And if I could just briefly tell you what it does, it just actually, it prohibits state investments that they have to be in the sole interest of the beneficiary taxpayer. It said, that sounds so innocuous, but then you realize the ASRS, the retirement system, isn't meant to benefit all the state taxpayers. It's the beneficiaries, the pension owners, those that are in public service and have their monies invested in this system. And so it would actually prohibit us from the state to contract with any investment managers that have a practice of engaging with companies based on non-pecuniary factors. So really what it does is it limits the treasurer and the retirement system from investing in, it limits their investment strategy and removes out of whole cloth companies that would be of beneficial and fiduciary interest to the retirement system. It just really harm their ability to make sound investment decisions. They would be removed. Lots of information would be absolutely removed from them. It doesn't make sense. It's a zombie bill that's appeared in the past 4 years, and it would just harm the fiduciary duty. There's no way that any of us could support it. Sadly, it's gone along party lines, and we expect that it will be passed in the House as well. So really disturbing. We do hope that the governor will veto it. So what we're doing, though, is we're getting like the Bankers Association and companies and conservative companies coming forward and saying, this isn't what we need. This harms our ability. This actually hurts our interest in trying to make the best investment decisions. We want to make the broadest decisions we can make. And maybe we don't want to invest in insurance companies right now, or it's strange. On the floor of the Senate, I was actually saying, maybe we should be supportive of this because Arizona has $300 million invested in Tesla. Maybe we should be getting out of Tesla stock. And that brought on some laughs, but it's a serious matter because this is just a whole scale, just, I don't want to say crazy, but it's just a ginned up war on ESG. And I want to quote from the sponsor who said that, let's see, let me find this quote. He said, it's an enforcement mechanism for authoritarianism. This is what ESG is in his mind, an enforcement mechanism for authoritarianism designed to force companies and individuals to adopt a woke agenda by assigning an ESG score. And if the company isn't woke enough, they lower their score. This flies in the face of reality that you can make sound investment decisions while incorporating all that a company is, and not just a narrow perspective of what a company is. And so, we have people speaking out. Frankly, I can't say it's the number one emphasis or focus right now because we are struggling with all of the terrible bills. We had a bounty bill last week that's going to come up on the floor for a vote, and it will essentially give $2,500 for every head. I'm not kidding. Like every undocumented immigrant that is detained and deported, an enforcement agency will get $25 a head. They're going to tax the wire transfer from here to Mexico to get the funds to pay off enforcement agencies. It's the most ugly, vile bill. And so while I'm very focused on this and the attempts to really restrict the consideration of ESGs, while I'm focused on it, we're struggling just for our communities and to ensure that our communities are safe. And we all know the struggles we're under now. So in the future, we're going to flip the legislature blue. We're only 2 seats behind. We need 2 seats in the Senate to come to just a tie, and that would be a world of difference. We'd actually get bills heard, Democratic bills heard in committee, and we have to fight like hell to retain a Democratic governor. We have Katie Hobbs serving us so well. She signed a lot of, uses her veto pen quite a bit, but we'd actually like to be proactive in this space and focus on ways we can spark investment. And we know Arizona, of all the states in the union, have really benefited from the IRA. We've seen an incredible growth in jobs in the clean energy economy, and we need to ensure that that growth is consistent, strong, and that we send a stable message out to the companies that we work with.
Thank you, Senator Kuby. So much going on in Arizona, and we appreciate all you're doing to kind of put the guardrails on that. We're going to bring up AFT leader Randi Weingarten. And Randi, I guess my question for you is, why does AFT care about pension stewardship for like, what's at stake for you all?
Okay, do we have about 5 hours? First off, let me just say it is an honor to be with all of you, and it's really and it's excuse me, I was just outside at one of the endless rallies fighting the Trump budget cuts, so excuse my voice. So it's really an honor to be with all of you, to be with Lauren and Brooke and Keith and Natalie, and to be with you, Renaye, because you have here the fiduciaries, both the legal fiduciaries, the legislative fiduciaries, the financial fiduciaries, and a union who understands what our fiduciary role ought to be. And oftentimes, none of us are in any of the corporate boardrooms where lots of these decisions get made. So I just really feel honored that with the convening of this panel and to be on this panel all together. And I just really wanted to say that, even though it took some of my minutes. This is why we do what we do. And in fact, the AFT has a council of trustees that we started about 10 years ago, because we are a disproportionately female workforce that has really fought to keep its defined benefit pension plans. We know that in the absence, and this is not a panel that I have to explain defined, but DC plans versus DB plans, but we know that in the absence of a defined benefit plan, working people are really at the whim of Wall Street. Think about last week. Because of Donald Trump's tariff maneuvers, Wall Street took a dive of 2,000 points. Think about if somebody only had a 401k or had some kind of defined contribution plan, and they were about to retire the day after the dive that Wall Street took, how much less they would have in retirement security because of that. What a defined benefit plan does, just like what Social Security does, is that you can actually count on what you can live on going forward. And so trustees, what we've tried to do is not only figure out what kind of secure retirement people need, but how to make sure that trustees of those plans are empowered enough so that they can make the decisions that Lauren just talked about. Instead of those decisions being political, those decisions are based upon the fiduciary needs of the people who have either, who have this deferred benefit. So if you don't actually then have the power or the knowledge to utilize your fiduciary duty in the most efficacious way, then somebody's going to tell you what to do. And frankly, that's either political or even worse than political. It's an investment manager from umpty-ump place or umpty-ump Y place who basically says, you trustees, you need to vote for this. And if you don't vote for this, you are defying your fiduciary duty. So ultimately, what we try to do as a union, we're not the trustees ourselves, but what we try to do as a union is educate the trustees have the convening authority, and we meet with them 4 times a year. And it's pretty cool for this disproportionately female workforce, when you see the trustees around the table, to see $4 trillion worth of workers' capital around that table. And then there are things that we do, like educate people about EKGs, educate people about, whether or not, I'll give you an example. Should retirement systems be investing in Tesla? We just saw that that Chase basically just said that the stock is overvalued. Should we be investing in it? Is that a wise investment? What does that mean? Same in terms of an investment in terms of private prisons, same in terms of an investment in, EKG. You have to do the kind of analysis to help trustees think about wise investments. So part of what we do is and I'll finish with this, make sure that the deferred wages that people get are real and can actually rely on them for a secure retirement. We have a preference for defined benefit plans instead of defined contribution plans because of all the reasons I just talked about. And frankly, if you have a defined contribution plan, then you got a company or you has to put in about 15 or 20% a year, which nobody really does. So we have a preference for defined benefit plans because we think that stops the pauperization of people in their retirement age. Number 3, we want to make sure that the trustees of these plans have the kind of education that they need so that they serve as real fiduciaries. And number 4, we actually use then that fiduciary power so that they're calling balls and strikes in a real way. And number 5, I go back to what I said at the beginning, which is to thank all of you for actually being the kind of fiduciaries that are absolutely essential for working people to have secure retirements. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Man, this panel is just giving us all types of great information. And I'm so excited to hear from Comptroller Lierman next. Comptroller Lierman, my question for you is, what role do state financial officers like you play, and how are you making change in the state?
Sure. Thanks so much, Renaye. And it's a great question. And I'm really honored to be on here with Attorney General Ellison and President Weingarten. I'm a Baltimore City public school mom, so my 2 kids are educated by AFT affiliate members. It's great to have you. Thanks for all you do. So I have the honor of serving as the 34th Comptroller of the state of Maryland, which is like the elected CFO of the state. And the role of Comptroller in Maryland is a little bit different than other state financial officers. I have a team of 1,200 people and 12 offices across the state. I'm the elected CFO and paymaster. We see every dollar in and every dollar out. We balance the books. We see the federal dollars come in. We know what grants we're receiving, where they're going. I also sit on several boards, including the Maryland State Retirement and Pension System Board. Although today I'm speaking in my capacity as an elected official, the elected comptroller, and not as a member of the board. I also serve as the state's revenue administrator, determining how to oversee and implement tax policy that our General Assembly passes and our governor. So I think, to your question of what can we be doing, these are issues that I worked on as a state legislator when I was in the Maryland House of Delegates, and have championed now as state comptroller as well. And when I think about risk and about, making sure that we are securing our, $70 billion in pension funds for over 415,000 state retirees who are my constituents, because I'm the Maryland comptroller. Most of them live in Maryland. I think about making sure we're taking into account all different types of risk, and that includes, of course, climate risk, which is something that I've worked on extensively throughout my career in elected office. It includes managing human capital management risk issues, and more. And so just to break that down a little bit, I think of climate change as something that has to be treated as investment risk, because it can have a direct impact, and does in fact have a direct impact on the financial performance of companies that we're investing in. In fact, in a 2020 report, the Federal Reserve Board of Governors even identified climate change as a critical emerging risk to the stability of the entire US financial system, right? And so as a financial officer, this is something that I look at in many different aspects of my job, both I help oversee procurement in the state of Maryland. So thinking about how we're spending our tax dollars through procurement and making sure that we're thinking about, when we're building a new school, that we're not building it in a flood zone, right? That we're building to, higher and better standards moving forward, so that we don't have to go back and retrofit. And then in the investment space, just making sure that we're thinking about physical changes to our world and the associated transition costs that we've seen since at least the times of the Industrial Revolution, as one product is replaced by a new, better, and more efficient product, right? This is just sort of a natural cycle of what we need to be looking into. And these transition risks, the physical risks, I think, are easy for people to understand and see, right? If, major insurance companies have stopped offering home insurance policies in California and Florida because of floods and wildfires, right? If those insurance companies don't believe it's a safe bet for them, should my beneficiaries be backing investment in real estate in those areas? I think most of them would say, no, that's not a good idea. And then the transitional risks, how I think about it is really just as we shift away from reliance on fossil fuels to renewable energy and all different types, that's just like other transitions that we've seen over the past century. I mean, this is just something that is always happening. And so we passed legislation when I was the House of Delegates to actually mandate that our pension system both quantify the risk and report on the risk every year, and also to actively treat climate risk as investment risk, but also to look at the opportunities in emerging technologies and in alternative energy, so that we could get in on the ground floor, right? And because these are long-term investments, make sure that our beneficiaries are able to benefit by getting in early and investing and making those investments. And I think, in fact, this year, even the pension system in Maryland adopted, they're setting up a climate advisory panel to select experts from diverse backgrounds who will help advise our investment managers on how to secure and safeguard the financial future of our state employees while addressing sort of the challenges of this changing climate to position us for strong long-term growth. On the human capital management side, I will say I was an attorney of many years. I sued companies and won on behalf of employees who were not being paid overtime or minimum wage. I wrote about OSHA enforcement. So I feel like I can say with firsthand authority that when companies violate labor laws and regulations, they expose themselves to litigation risks, right? Something the Attorney General here knows a lot about too. And there are serious costs in the form of legal fees, penalties, settlements. So in my role as comptroller, I want to make sure the state and our taxpayers and everybody here are getting the best value for their tax dollars. And I want to make sure that companies that we're working with, whether through the procurement space or investment space or what have you, that they're not violating labor laws, right? I don't want our tax dollars or our retirement dollars going to support attorneys' fees and settlement costs. And I don't want companies to skip out on their obligations by avoiding remitting revenue to the state, right? I also say reputation really matters. When poor human capital management or ethics issues are made public, damage to the brand can alienate both prospective employees and consumers. And I would even argue that reputational risk is actually it's much more important now than it used to be. So 3 decades ago, Thomson Reuters reported that as much as 95% of the average corporation's value consisted of tangible assets. But today, a recent report by the World Economic Forum and Fleishman Hillard PR firm, they said 3/5 of CEOs said they believed corporate brand and reputation represented more than 40% of their company's market capitalization. So it's just important to make sure that we're thinking strategically and that we're not investing in companies that are violating laws, because it opens them up to so many challenges for many reasons. And finally, I'll just add briefly that I also, in managing our state's finances, I take diversity really seriously, because we know that diversity adds value, right? Research has just repeatedly shown that firms owned by women and people of color perform just as well as their less diverse peers. And in fact, investment teams with diversity tend to generate better excess returns. We know that firms with women on a certain number of women on boards hold more, actually get more, what's the word I'm looking for? Patents over the long term as well. So there's real economic outcomes that happen when you have more diverse teams at the table. And I want those greater economic outcomes. Like, that's what I'm after. And if I'm going to be a great fiduciary, if I'm going to be the best financial officer I can be, I need to take all of that into account to maximize what I'm bringing back to my state. And so, I encourage folks to work with their state financial officers in many different aspects of the work that we're doing, because it can matter for so many reasons. So thanks so much for the opportunity to be here, and I look forward to continuing to work with everyone on the call.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Comptroller Lierman. So, Attorney General Ellison, Minnesota is a little different in that all three constitutional officers sit on the investment side. I guess the question that we have for you today is, as the Attorney General and sitting on the Minnesota State Board of Investment, how do you respond to these attacks coming from the federal level? Or do you? I don't know.
Yes, we do. Head on, straight at them, because we got good answers. I remember Brooke and I were in Washington talking to, I believe it was some committee members. Am I right about that, Brooke? On this issue of ESG investing. And I think the much harder case to make is anti-ESG, because what they're really arguing is short-term share price is the only thing you can consider. And any sophisticated investor knows that's not true. I mean, we have good answers. My advice is, when they want to debate, show up and make your case. We will come out ahead of them. And so many things they say are just incorrect. And so let's just talk about a few of those as I'm counseling us to lean in, fight back, speak up. It's our money, right? It's the money of the people of our state. That's one of the most important things. Who's Congress to tell a teacher who has worked 30 years in teaching kindergarten, what she should do? She elected us to be on this board. We're fiduciaries. We have responsibility. There really is an element of just interfering with the choices of investors here, and freedom is a big important issue, I think. But let me just say that we have been in this fight. 10 states with AGs, 10 states sent letters to the 6 major financial institutions claiming that their ESG investments were somehow against the law. They weren't. You don't have to be an attorney to see these attacks for what they are. They're just coordinated bullying and intimidation, much like what we're seeing every day around here. I serve on the board of the Minnesota State Board of Investments, what we call it, the SBI. We manage about $1.5 billion in assets for the benefit of about 820,000 active and retired Minnesota public employees. At the SBI, we know, and by the way, I'm one of those people, but at the SBI, we know that addressing environmental, social, and governance-related matters can lead to very positive portfolio and governance outcomes. The Minnesota SBI, we're proud to say, is a very high-performing public pension fund, and proof that ESG best practices and high market returns can and do go hand in hand. and hopefully they mitigate risk in a way that some of these others probably do not. Consideration of ESG factors is consistent with fiduciary duties that I carry, legal responsibility to evaluate potential risk and reward, and assessing the merits of an investment. It's our job to ask ourselves, is that going to be a problem? I'll tell you, if about a year ago, we had an investment, SBI had an investment in a company that was allegedly using child labor to clean up the kill floor after the day was over in a meatpacking plant. And this is the kind of thing that really, I mean, it's like Brooke was saying, this is a serious reputational harm. Now you could say, oh well, they cut the meat cheaper and have a higher shareholder value. So what if a bunch of 12-year-olds are in there getting exposed to toxic chemicals and and Lord knows what else? That just like short-term shareholder value cannot be the only thing. You've got to look bigger and broader and deeper. Minnesotans want us to take the risk into account. And all the time that I've had to go back and forth to Congress and explain ESG to these people, I've never had a Minnesotan come to me and say, oh, why are you doing this? It just doesn't happen. Minnesotans want us to look into these critical issues that involve risk and return, because not doing so comes with real financial risk to them. In just the last 3 years, we've seen 20 occurrences of environmental disasters, which have cost at least $1 billion worth of damage. I was in LA last week. My goodness, destruction. If you've been there, it's rough. Send your support to them. And I'll just say this. It's not only about avoiding risks, it's also about seizing opportunity. At the end of the day, the private sector overwhelmingly recognizes the value of considering ESG factors. 80% of asset owners believe ESG factors are material. 96% of the largest 250 global companies now issue sustainability report. And I'll just say this as I wrap up, and now I'm putting on my lawyer cap. So they've had a novel legal theory as to why you can't do ESG nowadays, and that is they're saying that ESG may be an illegal conspiracy prohibited under antitrust law. This is not true. Don't let them intimidate you. Antitrust law does not prohibit businesses or individuals from exercising their First Amendment right to work together to influence in legislative or regulatory policy. The Supreme Court made this principle clear a long time ago in the Noer-Pennington Doctrine, which allows companies to work together to influence public policy. Antitrust laws do not prohibit businesses from independently competing and choosing to make similar course of action as a competitor, like being more sustainable. They're literally saying that if one company is more sustainable and the other one's also more sustainable and they're competitors, well, there must be an illegal conspiracy. No, maybe they just both want to do environmental practices that make sense for their shareholders and the communities that they're in. So I'll just leave it there, but just want to let you all know that this thing comes from somewhere. The ESG movement didn't come out of thin air. It is the brainchild of some people who want to protect the fossil fuel industry. And that's really what's going on, folks. This is them fighting back, trying to keep us locked into their product, and not grabbing for a new future of solar, wind, and every other kind of renewable energy. I'll stop right there.
Thank you so much. Wow, this panel has been so powerful and given us such great information and strategic guidance. I want to turn it over now to Natalia. Natalia, I know that, Americans for Financial Reform has been working on these issues of sustainability for a very long time. I know that you all have a big picture overview, and there's a roadmap that you think that you kind of put out of how states can respond. Want to share your thoughts on this?
Yes, thank you so much, Renaye. And so honored to just be here with all these incredible panelists. So you've heard from all of these amazing elected officials, and of course President Weingarten. Just what is at stake with public pensions and the great work that's already been done or is underway to protect pensions and deploy state pension power to grow a strong economy for retirees, workers, and the public. So I wanted to give a quick overview of the policy roadmap Renaye mentioned we recently released, which has many actions state policymakers and pension officials can take to fight back against federal threats and corporate interests that are intent on taking away the power of state public pensions to shape our financial system and broader economy for the better. And the roadmap talks about three main categories of federal threats and what states can do about them. The first category is about the law that governs what those managing pensions are allowed to consider when making investment decisions. And some state laws and state attorneys general opinions have attempted to narrow what pensions are allowed to consider, trying to make the case that those managing workers' money should be blind to everything except short-term financial returns, as Attorney General Ellison just said. And the federal government is poised to try to do the same. And this ignores the fact that what pensions need is long-term sustainable value creation, not short-term risky returns. It also ignores the fact that pensions are the deferred wages of workers and they shouldn't be weaponized against them. And because state and local public pensions are governed by state law, state legislatures and state attorneys general can weigh in here, clarifying that providing legal certainty that pensions can and should take into account environmental and social factors and diversity, equity, and inclusion when making investment decisions. And that should include factors that affect both individual investments and factors that affect the economy as a whole. And they can also clarify that pensions can and should consider benefits for pension fund participants in addition to financial returns if the different types of investments being considered equally serve the financial interest of participants. And this is key so we don't get pension real estate investments pricing pension plan beneficiaries out of their homes or private equity investments privatizing their jobs. Instead, pension investments can help shape a strong economy for retirees, workers, and the public, including by investing in things like affordable housing. The second category of the policy roadmap is about the financial deregulation we're seeing from the federal government in both private and public markets. And I'll just focus here on private markets, which are already much more opaque, riskier, and more illiquid than public market investments, and often come with far higher investment fees. These investments also hide significant risks related to labor law violations, which the Comptroller referenced, and climate change. Public pensions make up almost a third of all private equity investors and represent more than 2/3 of their capital, according to the 2024 University of North Carolina study. So pensions can demand their private fund advisors provide them with much more information about fees, expenses, performance, audited financials, and more. And they can also mitigate risks related to labor law violations by adopting labor standards developed by the National Association of Building Trades Unions and the Laborers International Union of North America as a condition for committing capital to private equity. And they can mitigate climate-related risks by either adopting a policy against making private fund investments in fossil fuel infrastructure or incorporating transition readiness assessments and plans into their process for selecting private funded managers. And state legislatures can also weigh in on all of these issues, like the Maryland legislature did under Comptroller Lierman's leadership when it passed a law that requires pensions to incorporate climate risk management principles into all their investment policies and conduct a climate risk assessment of all their investments. And the third and last category of the policy roadmap is about large asset managers like BlackRock and State Street that many public pensions hire to manage their public equity index funds. And these asset managers have outsized influence over how public companies make decisions, and they're increasingly using their shareholder clout to rubber stamp risky, short-term focused corporate practices due to pressure from the anti-ESG campaign. And we've seen there's a huge disconnect between how these large asset managers vote their public pension clients and how their public pension clients vote on critical issues at large corporations. So we have pensions voting one way, and then the asset managers that are supposed to be working for them voting another way on critical issues such as board composition, executive pay, shareholder rights, and how to address risks and opportunities related to climate change, workforce issues, racial equity, and political spending. Pensions can take steps to vote their own shares instead of delegating this authority to asset managers. And they can also decrease risks to their investments by choosing asset managers to manage their index funds that meet criteria related to addressing risk to our financial system and broader economy. And state legislatures can also weigh in on this in terms of parameters of how setting guardrails for how these asset managers work for the pensions. And attorneys general can also make inquiries of the asset managers managing their state pensions to ensure they're doing so in compliance with state laws. So in summary, the stakes are high, and there's a lot for state policymakers and pension officials to do to both protect public pensions and also to use state pension power to grow a strong economy for retirees, workers, and the public. So I'll kick it back to you, Renaye.
Thank you so much. We have heard so much from all of our panelists today, and they have been amazing. We're going to jump to our Q&A portion of the webinar right now, and we're going to start by highlighting some questions that we've gotten from press. And so I think we're going to highlight one of those questions so they can ask it directly. Malone, are we highlighting the person? Okay. I will ask the question. This question was submitted by Mario Arisa. It says, given the forces that are funding anti-ESG efforts in red states, would you feel comfortable naming names in terms of following the money? Additionally, would you mind commenting on who benefits the most when state pension plans are forced to only work with certain companies? Seems like a ripe moment for a kickback. I don't know which of the panelists that was directed to, but anyone who wants to answer that, should feel free.
All you really got to do is Google anti-ESG movement. Plenty of stuff comes up. Plenty of stuff comes up. So I would tell you that it is, it's a coalition of some politicians, some industry people, and some movement activists, but it all boils down to folks, trying to protect their interests, and a lot of them are revolve around the oil and gas industry. By the way, I'm suing them now. ExxonMobil, the American Petroleum Institute, Koch Industries, suing them all. They tried to get my case dismissed. They failed. And we'll see what a jury has to say about it.
Thank you, Attorney General Ellison. I'm going to jump to the next question unless one of the other panelists wants to weigh in here. Okay.
Well,
Randi?
let me just say that, whether it's ESG, although I really hate the acronyms, so whether it's the alternative investments in terms of the environmental investments, whether it's private equity, whether it's other kinds of investments that actually, over the long term, make our country more sustainable, make our economy more sustainable. Part of the root cause here is that the investor class has engaged in short-termism that basically only says, and Natalie and Brooke and Keith will help me out here if I'm using the vernacular instead of the appropriate legal jargon. But essentially it says, if, some investor sheet says that they can make 8% from an investment, even though there may be no backup to that whatsoever, that trustees are only supposed to look at that number as opposed to a more holistic view of sustainability. And I think what you're hearing from Brooke and Natalie in particular is that there is Natalia in particular, is that there are other longer term horizons that we should be looking at in terms of sustainability, in terms of environment, in terms of other kinds of things. And I would say that the Biden administration was starting to actually look at a different kind of definition, including, workforce standards and, and building standards and labor standards. But that, this whole horizon, I think, is something that is worthwhile to look at. And if you did that, you looked at that through the sustainability and the American dream standard, or long-term economic viability for, workers and, for the working class, as well as the investment class, then all of a sudden issues around private equity would look a lot different. All of a sudden issues around climate sustainability would look a lot different. Issues around workers being able to make a living wage would be a lot different. And I think that that is a horizon that we need to be looking at in terms of what really constitutes fiduciary duty and what really constitutes long-term economic viability.
Thank you, Randi. While I have you, is a question that was directed towards you. It says that these attacks are not the first on public worker pensions, and particularly defined benefit pensions. How do you see the anti-ESG attacks within this broader history of attacks on a safe and secure retirement for teachers and other workers? In particular, how do you see this as an attack on pension shareholders' rights, given the focus on things like proxy voting power, which gives market voice to working people?
So look, I would actually, let me just say, I read on Blue Sky today, I don't know if it's true or not, but, so I'm giving you my source, that shareholders today voted down an Apple initiated resolution to strip away diversity, equity, and inclusion actions within Apple. That, the democratization of a public corporation is, it's a perfect example of what shareholders did in a public corporation. So I think there's a lot to actually unpack in that question. There's the issue of retirement security, and that to ensure retirement security, whether it's a private plan or a public plan, the trustees have to work in the benefit of the plan participants. And part of that is to make sure that the retirement funds are there, whether it's public or private. And there's been a huge assault on all retirement security, I would say, until the last probably 5 or so years. Remember, in the last recession in 2008 or 10, how many times did one basically say that the bullshit, excuse my language, that $2,000 of a car's cost were because of the pensions that, UAW workers were getting? Well, those were deferred wages. And so, yes, they were getting those wages. They were deferred wages so that they paid for that as part and parcel of what their wage structure was in bargaining over all that time. So the issue of ensuring in this kind of capitalist system that we're in, where the government, unlike in Australia, unlike in other places, basically pensions are employer based, that's one issue. The second issue, though, is the governance of corporations. And, part of what a trustee deals with when they invest in equity as opposed to in bonds is, really looking at the viability and sustainability of those corporations. And in some ways, that's where proxy voting and all of that happen. So there's an overlap. Obviously, if you're a pension system and you have, 10% of your income or investments is the Apple shares, then you're going to be really, really, really focused on what's going on in an Apple shareholder meeting. And the same is true is whether it's ESG or whether it's anything else. So there is an overlap in terms of how pension trustees and investment managers look at what's going on in a particular investment. But their bigger issue is, how do they make sure that the people that they are responsible for are getting the retirement income that they so deserve?
Thank you so much, Randi. I have another question directed to both Brooke, Comptroller Lierman, and Attorney General Ellison. This is a question regarding the Arizona bill, but it's really relevant, and we want you to answer based on your information and your state relevance. The state anti-ESG bills that we see, if the text is about focusing on pecuniary interest, how much room is there to feasibly argue that things like climate risk are pecuniary risk? If the likes of Larry Fink acknowledge that climate risk is an investment risk, isn't that a pecuniary factor? I realize the proponents of the bill will argue against that point, but regarding pensions wanting to implement good due diligence on ESG, could this be a defensible argument?
So I'll defer to the Attorney General, because I'm not a practicing litigator anymore, on what could be a good argument in court. But I would maintain, to be a good fiduciary, you have to take all different types of risk into account. And climate risk is just one of many types of risk. So when in the public pension meetings that have existed in the past, and any member of the public can attend and watch, different investment managers have talked about, for instance, insurance and investments in the insurance industry, and keeping track of whether insurance companies are continuing to provide policies in areas that are really unsafe, which would potentially lead to lower returns for unsafe in terms of climate risk, because of heightened risk of floods and fires, and that would lead to challenges for investors. So I certainly think there are very good arguments that you can make that these are pecuniary, and to be a good fiduciary, which is the standard that pension fund trustees must follow. You take all the different risks into account when you are overseeing a fund. And this is just yet one more type of risk that should be taken into account when you're evaluating your options for investment.
Of course, it's a good argument. It's common sense. It makes sense. And if you explain it to a jury, they will get it. And here's some more you could say that, there was a study in Texas. They did a study on the Texas's anti-ESG law, and it showed that in 1 year, the law cost Texans $700 million in lost economic activity, $180 million in decreased annual earnings, $33 million in tax revenue, and more than 3,000 fewer full-time jobs. That's their ESG. So basically, they have a dominant industry in Texas. I wonder if you know what it is. And they're making decisions to favor that industry as opposed to the overall economy. And they're using this anti-ESG stuff to do it. Indiana did the same thing, an anti-sustainable investing bill studied would cut pension returns by $6.7 billion over the next 10 years. A study revealed Kansas could lose up to $3.6 billion in the same time frame on a similar bill. So a lot of it is just, it's not only oil and gas, but that's the kernel of it. But then it just gets to be mixed up in the whole, anti-woke, MAGA, this is what we do, tribal type politics. People like us do this, so everybody follows along. And so absolutely your core point being, there's a lot of things that you can put an economic argument into that we call environment, sustainability, and social and governance and things like that. There's a lot of things that because I think that the point is made by several people. These are good economic arguments. So there's an economic case to be made, but I think they're talking about something different. They're talking about share price tomorrow, I guess. I mean, it really is sort of a silly argument when you boil it down. But I think what we got to do is stand up and defend what we're doing and never shrink from the opportunity to talk about it.
Thank you. So I have another question. And the question is really focused on how pension trustees can go on the offense to hold companies accountable for abusing workers in the private sector. And this question came from an official with Jordan Fine from Unite Here Local 11, who specifically thank Attorney General Ellison, who met with hotel workers when they were on strike against a private equity-owned company, and really helped ensure that Minnesota SBI engaged and helped facilitate a positive resolution of those strikes that helped deliver what he says is a life-changing contract for hotel workers.
You know, I'd like to hear what Randi has to say about this one, but I'll just say this. An active union member should get to know what a share price is, should get to know what the share price of the company you work for is selling at, should figure out when the investor meetings are going to be, should read those prospectuses and become kind of a little amateur financial specialist, because, you know, they're talking about our money, you know. So, I mean, I was more than happy to sit down and work with people. And I was more than happy to make it clear that we have to, in order for a sustainable return for our beneficiaries, we've got to have our companies where we hold investments have labor peace.
Yeah. I couldn't agree with the Attorney General more. And I think that you're hearing that even in terms of all of the conversation we've all had, and from my original introduction, which is, why did we start this center? Why did we start this trustees council? Why do we actually spend funding every year to have like a 3-day tutorial for trustees all across the country? Because at the end of the day, knowledge is power. And if people don't know, you know, if you work for a private corporation, whether it's publicly held or not publicly held, and you don't know anything about its aims and aspirations, first off, if you're the CEO of that company, it's a really stupid practice to not engage your workers anyway in the core of what you are doing. But if you are, if you are basically in the public service and your retirement income is based, say, on a 70-30 dispersed allocation, where 70% is equity, 30% is bonds, and you have no idea, the trustees have no idea, you know, what the equity is invested in, shame on us. And, you know, that's part of why we're saying investment managers, or the people who do this, you have to report to the fiduciaries. And the fiduciaries are the ones, if they're making the decisions, they have to have adequate knowledge to do that.
Thank you so much. We're going to wrap up. We're kind of at time now. And I just have one final question, and I hope you guys can respond to as a call to action. And this question comes from Jay O'Neill, who helped lead the West Virginia teacher strike. And what Jay says is that it's daunting to see all of the attacks happening right now on pensions, on workers' rights, on climate, financial red. You all are in a powerful position, but we all know that you can't do it by yourself. What do you need from us? What can plan members and everyday people do to support your efforts? So we want to start, Randi, you want to start, and then we'll go to Brooke.
So first off, thank you for teaching. Thank you for having engaged in that work. And for any of the workers that are on this, what we are, or any of the teachers or any of the parents, what we're seeing is that local actions on the ground in districts, talking about, not only talking to your congresspeople, but talking to other people in the community, like we are going to do on March 4th, are more important than almost anything else. It's the, if we're communicating with community and fighting for the things that community wants, whether they voted for Donald Trump or Kamala Harris, people in community want to have a better life. They want the prices of eggs to go down. They want their level of income to go up. They want to make sure they have decent housing, decent schools that are well funded. And so that is what my call to action is, that we need to show up in our communities and fight for what we need to fight for locally, you know, talking to the Congress, not only the courts, but the court of public opinion, talking in terms of commerce. That is what we need to do. And so what you did several years ago in terms of the Red for Ed fight, we need to revisit right now, starting on March 4th. March 4th, we are protecting our kids in our communities.
Thank you. Brooke?
Thank you. Yes, again, I echo President Weingarten's gratitude to you for jumping in, for being on this call, for taking the time. I mean, we're all busy, you're busy, living their lives. And so this is an extra thing to do to both protect your pension and your communities, but also our future, right? And for our kids. And so, look, I appreciate everything that you're doing. I do think, you know, what she said, I agree with everything President Weingarten said. I'd also add, you know, sort of like speak up from your perspective, right? Whether that's letters to the editor in your local paper or going to community meetings to talk about these sorts of issues. The more we can personalize some of the big things that are happening, right? Sometimes it feels things that are happening in Washington or in our state capitals feels really big. And we need to personalize it so that people understand that these big things have real impacts on neighbors and community members and their kids' teachers. And so the more that folks can humanize some of the challenges that exist right now, I think that helps people see that you know, what the real impact of these things are. So I would just encourage you to keep learning, keep stepping up, keep showing up, using your voice to tell your story and why you personally care about things, about these issues. So thank you so much. Really appreciate being here today, and so grateful that everybody has taken the time to do this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Comptroller. Natalia?
Well, I think just showing up, I think, every day, and I think we there's so much onslaught every day, and I think we can't get bogged down in it. So finding like very specific, discrete things that are within your control and within your area of influence, and like, you know, actually join a local group that's fighting on these issues and issues that are close to you. And we have to start being more active, and I think that's the most effective you know, way to counteract and not fall into despair with so many attacks coming in. So we just have to lean in on that.
Thank you, everybody. I know that Attorney General Ellison had to leave, and State Senator Kuby had to leave earlier as well. I want to thank all of our amazing panelists for sharing their wisdom and insight on this critical dialogue today. I want to thank Americans for Financial Reform and Horizon Project for sponsoring this event today. I want to remind everybody on this call that it's only been a little over 30 days, so we've got some time to figure it out. No one has all the answers right now, but we're working on them. And I think, you know, being in a mindset to respond and not have to react to everything is really important. So you'll be hearing more from Horizon and Americans for Financial Reform on how we can respond in this critical moment. And thank you again to all of our panelists. Have a good evening, everybody. Bye-bye.